the little video that you have already seen or that you will see in near future. And it's a little bit the result of working in the early recordings group. I had the chance to listen to so many artists from the past. I did even a special study of all the cellists who were born around 1850s and their recordings, the way they play. And I was very surprised at the many things of the things that they do. They have not been taken by the HIP movement, like the use of portamento, which I'm very interested, the use of tempo modifications, etc., etc. So this, I think, is quite a discovery when we listen to this kind of artists from the past. So what I did for this video, I selected a few pieces. The first one was the Schumann's Abendlied. It was a very important piece that Joachim played in Schumann's funeral. I studied 15 different editions from the 19th century. I studied the 5 early recordings of the piece. And even we were very lucky because Sebastian Bausch found a wonderful piano roll supposed to be by George Enesco, playing the accompaniment. So I had the crazy idea to include Enesco in the video. It was quite challenging because he wouldn't listen to me, he wouldn't follow at all. But besides the spookiness of the idea, I hope you enjoy it. Anyway. Also, thanks to Johannes Gebauer, another member of the early recording group, he found the text that Andreas Moser wrote inspired by the Abendlied. And so it was, the whole idea of the video is a little bit on the romantic side. You will see it's recorded in a romantic palace in Madrid. There is this picture by Van Gogh at the beginning. You'll hear the recitation by Jean-Marie Lelièvre of the, I will improvise at many points of the video in doing modulation, for instance, between the Popper etudes that I play after I play the Abendlied, just to go from B flat minor to D major. I mean, it needs something, I guess. And also the 2 etudes I selected by Popper. Why David Popper? Because he has been probably the most important 19th century cellist of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. He had so many influences. He was a really spectacular musician, composer, pianist. And I think we can feel the Chopin's influence very much, especially in the second etude. And finally, I finished the video with the fragment from the Souvenir de Spa, which shows is by Adrien François Servais, the great example of the Franco-Belgian school. And it will make quite a contrast with the German tradition in the Abendlied, which I was mostly inspired by Maquis Soldat's recording, and the Franco-Belgian school, which is so different in all the ways. What I like very much about this piece, Souvenir de Spa, is that we have the expressive fingerings by Servais, and we can see the great variety of portamento that it was included in his playing, and portamento, German portamento, French portamento, the 3 different kinds of the Charles de Berrio portamentos, the vif, douce, traîné. Another very exotic ones, like I call the zigzag portamento that Quiroga does, also included, and singing, of course, singing portamento like Leaping Grace, Anticipation, and I guess it can be seen over there. Just to finish, I would just mention the director of the video. He's a very artistic movie maker. And as you will feel, there is a great sophistication and beauty of the images that I think the major influence is Tarkovsky. He always loved this director, and just also on the other hand, he likes the simplicity of the French maker Bresson. So I think there is also these two aspects: sophistication, beauty of image, and at the same time simplicity. I really hope you enjoyed.
So thank you very much, Aldo. And now we have our third cellist of the night, Fernando Caida Greco. So you are presenting a Franchomme nocturne played with Edoardo Torbianelli at Royaumont, where you were teaching for workshops 2 years ago and last year. So please.
Yes. Hi to everybody. I'm Fernando Caida Greco and I'm an Italian cellist. I am teaching the chamber music in the Conservatory of Campobasso. And since many years, I'm interested in the old cello technique. And with this technique and of course with cut strings and all the stuff like Aldo said before, I'm also playing the whole repertoire of the cello till 21st century. Edoardo Torbianelli and me started to collaborate in the year 2000. This collaboration was the foundation of a dialogue and a very long time research together, with a special focus on classical and romantic repertoire. At the beginning of this research 20 years ago, I started to read very deep and to study all the methods, written sources of the 19th century and listening to the early recordings. Immediately, I realized that it was a strong connection between the use of the cello in this time and the Italian bel canto tradition. For the bel canto tradition, the virtuosity, it was the perfect uniformity of the voice, the flexibility of the voice, the capacity to get a smooth tone, and the emphasis was placed more on the control of the technique as, for example, the volume of the voice. To get this on the cello, first of all, for me, it was necessary to remove my previous technique and learn new movements. For example, for the right hand, it was necessary for me to find a very light bow and the capacity to use for the dynamics the speed and quantity of the bow instead of pressure. At the same time, it was important to find alternative ways of distribution of the bow and alternative ways to use different parts of the bow. And with this, it was for me much more easy to get the correct phrasing and the control of the legato. For the left hand, I was concentrated first of all on the suppleness and stamina of the fingers, the independence of the fingers that I was studying in a very deep way with the contrapoint exercises on the cello. And it was important to develop also a special taste for the intonation. With these tools, it was for me very important to work with Edoardo Torbianelli as a duo. And we try to find the best possible fusion of the sound and to work also to aesthetic elements. as for example, the structural, narrative, and emotional meaning of the composition, the strategies of eloquence and communication, and the link between emotional character of each part of the composition and rhythmical timing. Also, it was very important for us to investigate the use of rubato and the different kinds of portamenti and vibrato. Finally, it was very important to get the balance between intensity and timbre of the sound. After many years, I can say that now our style of playing is, I would say, a quasi improvisando style, in the sense that the proposition and reaction between the two musicians is more important than a precise result. For this event, we choose this nocturne by Franchomme that was very close friend of Chopin. For us, this music is the symbol of classical music in a way. Because for us, classical music means classical form. So for us, and in our playing, the structure is the most important. And we try to play far from easy or superficial effects. We hope you will enjoy this recording we choose for you. And I thank you for listening.
Yes. So thank you for to the four of you. And so our idea is that we keep this Zoom meeting open. And if you can go and watch the 3 videos on the OCAST platform, I'm going to send you the link. Maybe you know it already. I send it to you. And we can meet again in maybe 30 minutes. So now it's 8:25, maybe 5 to 9 if you want. And we can discuss on all the topics which were proposed by the 3 musicians, the 4 musicians. Just to mention that we decided to record our meeting so that some people who couldn't be there today could see it again later on. So if you want, you go to the OCAST platform. I just sent it to you, and you can click to that, and then you can see the video, and we come back in half an hour.
Yes, and we will wait for you all, so no rush in the end either. Yeah, we'll wait for everybody. Okay.
Hello to everybody. I don't know if everybody could listen and watch to the videos. I hope most of you did. And I suggest that any of you can start asking questions to the 3 cellists. I don't know who wants to speak up first. I don't know, maybe Kai, I see he's smiling.
I will just say something quickly that as soon as somebody wants to ask a question, they're free to click on the little microphone that is currently red, and they will be heard. And I'll be in charge of muting people again if I see the need for that. But, yeah.
Well, if I'm supposed to give the first reaction, thank you very much for everyone. This is a wonderful kaleidoscope of possibilities of how to react to 19th century recordings and what you can personally get from the information. So I really think it's a very, very wonderful, very good idea to have everyone start and propose their own results, really. And of course, all these 3 propositions were very different in a way because you were concentrating on different aspects. I strongly believe that you all captured very essential ways of performing 19th century repertoire, as can be heard from these early recordings. And the problem, of course, is that the 19th century is a very long time span. We have recordings from a very small portion of this time. And even in this small portion, we have representations of very different personalities. So how do you react as your own musical personality to the very small amount of evidence that we have? And this is a question that everyone needs to cope with. And I think all of the three examples were very, very interesting and very well done in your decision of how to cope with what's out there. So I would really, first of all, just thank you for daring to do this and for producing wonderful moments that are obviously not part of the 21st century tradition of doing these things. So all of that is wonderful. Thank you.
Do not hesitate to react. Let's have a conversation.
I have a question
okay.
for...
who is starting? Yotam, okay.
Can I ask something? Yes.
Of course.
I wanted to ask Aldo. I'm curious because we don't have that many recordings of solo music. So I'm curious how you bridged that gap as a performer. How what do you do with that? At least cello music, right? Because violin, there's some stuff for violin that's been recorded solo, but cello stuff is really, there's not a lot, right?
Exactly. That's a very good question, because in the situation when I had to choose the repertoire, it happened that I could not have a pianist. I could only have the piano roll and of Enesco, but of course that wasn't enough to fill in the video. And I was thinking, of course, Bach wasn't an option in this case. Bach is always a great option. I could have done the Sam Grusmacher possibility of his funny arrangement of the suites, but finally I thought that it's true what you say, that basically we don't have solo cello recordings, real solo. We do have, of course, with violinists, as you would very well know, the Joachim solo violin recording of the Bach, and well, even when Marie Soldat, even though it's later on, she also recorded solo Bach, and for me it was challenging to play these Popper etudes, because in general also they are pieces that are considered, how to say, well, many cellists have allergy to Popper, as probably. And I thought it would be a challenge to try to give a different view of this music. To be honest, yeah, playing the Popper, I didn't have a clear example of an early recording. This is absolutely true. I was even more thinking of even pianists, like someone like Bachmann, or in this style, playing Chopin solo and what they do with the left hand and how they phrase it and this and that. But certainly it was quite daring to record these two Popper etudes.
Thanks for the interesting answer.
Thanks.
Maybe?
I have a question for Aldo as well. Besides your wonderful playing, what did you do to prepare the declamation, the recitation of the poem? Because this, we have a lot of recordings of declamation of poetry as well, but it sounded much more modern than your cello performance. That sounded pretty 19th century, but the declamation was very modern.
Yes. I wonder if Jean-Marie is around. I don't know Well,
I don't think she's not here, I think.
She's not here. Oh, okay. Yeah, because the situation of doing the whole thing was very much a pandemic situation, in the way that we had the idea, I had the idea to put the recitation, and she was very, very nice to do it from Switzerland, but we really couldn't work on the actual, melodramatic declamation that, yeah, absolutely, totally agree. I mean,
I think in a way, the old historical recordings of declamation of French poetry would introduce your approach to improvisation and expressivity in a better way. So I very much liked the idea to introducing your performance with this poem and the picture. I really do like that a lot. But I think it was not on the same level yet.
Yeah. I understand. Yes. I'm so glad that you like it. It didn't bother you, the improvisation I did under the poem, I hope.
No, of course we need more of that, because improvisation is the most immediate immersement into this style. So if you dare to do that, I mean, this is very risky, but at the same time very necessary to try and travel and to really get into this style. Maybe later your improvisation would be a little bit shorter in time, because of course for balance, so everyone knows that it's an introduction to something that's going to come. But I like that a lot, and so congratulations to that improvisation as well.
Oh, thank you so much, Kai.
I believe that Stipe, you had a question, because I saw you raise your hand. So if you want.
Yes. First of all, I would like to congratulate to everybody. It was such a kind of, especially in these circumstances, when we are really seeking for the concert atmosphere, it was amazing. I mean, it was really a great, how can I say, totally new aspect of making the music for me, in the sense of like having all these various composers from the 90s, so from the early 19th century towards the late 19th century. I have the question for Octavie and Artem.
Yes.
For this duo, that was fantasy, if I remember well.
Romance and
a romance, yeah. Sorry. So I noticed, of course, there are so many beautiful aspects. It's almost difficult to express, to describe, and this kind of seeking for the freedom. For the inner freedom, let's say, for this flexibility in the phrase, but at the same time to keep the unity of the phrase. That's really one very important vocal principle. As vocal accompanist, it's extremely hard, for one sense, to have this ambivalence of taking the structure very, very pregnant, not pregnant, but somehow very strict. And I have the question, maybe if you can just, tell us some secrets about your approach to this text. What were the most important elements? How by seeking your personal language, of course, it was you told that it was inspired by the old recordings, but what was the exact difference? How also in your dialogue to find some common language and really to define, to have really this sharpness, and kind of caprice, in your in the romance, it was great, really.
Thank you. Well, actually, you raised a lot of things at the same time. It's great.
Sorry.
No, it's
open a can of worms.
But I very much liked what you started saying immediately about the capricious and the freedom that one gets, also in connection with having a sense of structure.
Mm-hmm.
And there's one aspect that I have to say, actually it's quite simple in a way. One aspect that I find gives both at the same time. And it's something that I very much started noticing as I looked more into detail into early recordings. And one aspect that is also very present in the recordings of Joseph Rollmann, which served as one of the inspirations for this interpretation and for other interpretations of Saint-Saëns' music that we've worked on in the past. And that is that we notice that often soloists, Joseph Rollmann does it in several recordings where they take the lead, but in such a way that basically they would start a phrase or an important note or an important passage or a new bar way before the accompaniment has finished what it was in the middle of doing before.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if you've ever had an experience of we've had experiences like this we were discussing in the past in our performance life, where we would feel like everybody's on stage waiting for each other, and it creates this kind of frozen, and it's really unbearable, I find, when this happens. And I like the fact that you can hear on several early recordings the complete opposite, whereas the soloist wants to say something, wants to do something with the music, wants to connect two ideas or two phrases, and there is none of this waiting, and it's actually just taking the lead in this complete way. And you kind of, if you start practicing that as a duo, eventually I think you reach a lot more freedom. It doesn't feel anymore that you have to be so precisely together, and if not, you just failed at achieving good coordination. You free yourself from these ideas, and I don't know. In our experience, it was. Do you want to say also? About
I would just like to add from the side of the accompanist. What we also hear on many of the early recordings is that there's a certain elasticity in how accompanists react to the soloist. So it's not like, in a normal performance today, you're just trying to be together. All the time, at all costs. So what happens on early recordings is that there is a certain, it's almost like a little bit of a delay. So the accompanists do react to small changes in tempo and all that, but with a little bit of a delay. So it's as if the general contour of the phrase in terms of sort of shaping and time of a phrase is there, but they don't line up exactly. And so that often creates this sense of fantasy and freedom without being, completely ignoring each other or anything like this. So there's still a lot of connection, but it's very human. It happens like if you were playing with somebody for the first time, which was in many cases, that's what it was in early recordings. But
to me, it almost sounds like there's the soloist and then a rubber band tying it to the accompaniment, and it kind of has a little bit of a delay in how it reacts to what's happening, but it still follows, and then it's quite sophisticated sometimes.
Bravo, bravi.
Thank you.
Maybe this connects with what was Fernando explaining about quasi-improvisating or something like this. Maybe you could explain to us again, Fernando. We can't hear you. What happened?
Fernando, you're unmuted, but maybe there is something with your microphone because we still can't hear you. Maybe, no, we still can't hear you. I think Christopher wanted to ask something, maybe while Fernando's solving the problem.
Sure. So I had two questions, actually. One of them was regarding something that Artem said earlier, which was that kind of bird's eye view that you often get from early recordings. And I was just curious, you said that you'd come to some conclusions about some of the devices that illuminate the structure of the piece. And I'd be really curious to hear more about that. I also have another question for, mainly for Aldo, I guess. I noticed in his recordings, especially there was so much florid passages in one of the Popper that seems to me in the hands of most contemporary cellists and musicians in general, florid passages often become just about the precision, whereas in Aldo's recordings, it was so much more about the journey and the motion, even though they were still very precise. So I would love to hear anything Aldo would have to say about, or anybody about the way the motion of phrases that just seems to be so different in this style to me than the style that we are accustomed to.
I guess I'll start with your first question. Yeah, so I was specifically looking at what Saint-Saëns does on his recordings, but a lot of these things are, of course, shared by many other musicians from the period. And I would split it in two categories, so how this kind of bird eye view is achieved. So one of the things that he does is the way he treats repeated material. So if there is, let's say, an 8-bar phrase, and then it repeats again, maybe it's elaborated, he gets progressively a little bit faster. So that gives you a sense, basically, once you heard material, then when you hear it again, he goes through it a little bit more. It's a subtle change, but it's very noticeable. And if you have an ABA kind of form, then when he gets to the A at the end of the piece, it's quite a bit faster. So that's one thing. And I think what's important there is that for this to be convincing, this is something I found from trying to imitate and integrate these aspects. One has to be very careful with the clarity of rhythms, especially things like dotted rhythms, because then that gives it a very sort of clear and convincing character, and it doesn't sound sloppy, which it definitely doesn't when Saint-Saëns plays, but it did when I tried to imitate it at first. So that's something I discovered. And the other thing is the connection between the musical material and things like harmony, the length of slurs, the amount of articulation and small dynamics, things like that affect how fast he plays. So for example, if there is a longer slur, he almost systematically goes faster. If there is more articulation, little staccatos, things like that here and there, he would slow down to show the detail. More virtuosic passages, he goes quite a bit faster, which is, on most modern recordings, we do the opposite. We want to make everything clear and nice. That's not the case with Saint-Saëns. If it's crazy, it's crazy. There's gonna be no question about it. And another important aspect is the treatment of cadences. We very often slow down at cadences. He does the opposite. He almost systematically speeds up and makes them very light, and he just throws them out there and goes to the next thing. It's similar to the kind of thing that Octavie was talking about with soloists taking the initiative and coming in earlier before the performer, before the accompanist. In the case of a solo piano, it's the right hand often does that, or sort of you jump into the new phrase. Cadence is a very we know how that goes. It's just a formula. Let's get to the new, more interesting material. Those are some impressions.
Maybe I can answer your question also, Christopher. I think it's a very, very interesting. It's nice for me to hear that you did notice this kind of motion, that it didn't sound mechanic. I think the problem with this is particularly playing etudes, and even more by Popper, is that people has a little bit chronometric tendency. They put the metronome, they play like that. And I think what should happen in order to have a good Gestaltungskraft, which is to say all these of notes to people at other musical parameters. And if we react to harmony, if we react to phrasing, then the tempo doesn't keep the same. It's not the same if you're going to play a normal cadence, or you're going to play a broken cadence, or you're going to do who knows what. or if you are in a first bar of a sentence, or you suddenly are in a last bar. And so all the reactions to the musical parameters, I think the tempo can really be affected by it. And if it is not, it's when it sounds mechanic and it sounds, well, what we would say modernistic, probably. That the way to get a job in an orchestra, I guess you have to be metronomic in a way. But anyway, that's another subject.
Fernando, did you manage to fix the microphone issue?
I think now it works. You can,
Yes.
yeah, you can. Yeah.
Yes.
I have to say that I agree with you in all these technical aspects of the improvisation and rubato in all this music. And I just would like to add some things that for me are important. In our style of performance, we use a lot the interaction that is continuously stimulated between the two musicians. So it's not like one is accompanies the other, the soloist, but the pianist, even if it's a more solo piece for the cello, it's helping a lot the cellist to follow the character of the composition. To get this, in our case, it was very important to work improvising first on very simple patterns like scales and different harmonies, and then trying to create pieces using different characters, like, for example, are described in Baillot method. So, for example, if you take the nocturne we played, the first part is in the naive character. Then when the double stops passage comes, here we have another character that it's more fantastic, capriccioso, agitato, let's say. And then in the middle part, for example, we have an appassionato character. This is more like espressivo character. And then the piece comes back. So, for example, before to practice this piece, we improvise a lot using these characters, these specific characters, because we know that we need these characters to play the piece. And the point is that in this way, we can find not only the timing, but also the sound of ourselves. Because you will notice that when you improvise in this way, there is, I don't know, a different connection between yourself and the instrument, and you really get a sound that comes from your art, from your feelings. And I think this is very important when you come back to a written piece.
Thank you. That was really interesting, Fernando. I don't think I've ever heard anybody else tell me about this kind of approach. I see that Jacopo Ristori has a hand for a question.
Yes. Well, as was already said, it was beautiful to listen to three different results of the research that you're doing for many years. I was just thinking during the reactions of the others about a question to everybody that is more about the backstage, so a bit more the process of this. And of course, like the Romantic Lab of Octavie and Artem is aiming to understand the language from the recording for, in fact, learning the language, because this is about, I think. I mean, so my question is, during your practicing and experimenting, when do you find the limits for what we can say the good taste for your own playing, your own taste? So assuming that you have absorbed the language, how do you judge during your practicing, your own studying, that you reached like to not cross over the limits of doing something tacky or exaggerated, and all the other way around? When it is, when do you think, okay, yes, I reached what maybe could have been the taste of the time, or my taste together with the features of the 19th century music? So just a question for your own approach, and how does it work for yourself behind the scene, let's say.
Thank you, Jacopo. I think this is a really interesting question, and I'm really curious to hear what the other, everybody else will answer, Fernando and Aldo, and if others want to also. I think, yeah, I think in my case at this point, I'm still remaining quite open-minded, because I do feel like I'm adapting and still getting taught some things from my experience of listening. So I think right now I'm not being too judgmental in terms of asserting that something is bad taste and something is good taste. But this is just maybe a step in the process of getting acquainted with the styles, because also I would say styles, I think there is more than one style that we can hear on recordings. But of course, when you reach the point when you have to perform something yourself, I think, of course, you don't have many options. You kind of have to rely on some kind of a musical instinct. And our musical instincts are taught through time, through experiences, through what we've heard, what we've liked to hear, what we became accustomed to, so acquired taste. And so I think this is a completely, it's a scale basically, that it's a continuously changing thing. So yeah, and so that's why I think when I try to play a certain piece, then maybe I'll try to tune my instincts to a certain school perhaps, or certain individuals that I know are related. But yeah, I think it's a very interesting question. So I don't have one clear answer. Do you have something different to say on this?
No, I don't rely on taste too much, especially not on mine. I just do the thing.
There was a question from Marc Bellet, I think.
But can't we maybe hear what Fernando and Aldo would?
Yeah, I would like to answer Jacopo, if possible, because the question is very good. But what is tacky? What is bad taste? Is something that we consider with our perspective, 21st century, or we have to think about the taste that they did have at the end of 19th century, or we do have to think of the taste that I'm sure if I have to play the Broken Melody by Van Veen, I wouldn't be satisfied if I finish the performance and someone doesn't try to throw me a tomato. That would be very disappointing. I know it's very tacky, but for nowadays taste. But if you don't do that, just don't play Van Veen Broken Melody. So everything depends on what you want and what aesthetic. Of course, if you want to be politically correct and to earn a lot of money, your question is, okay, I'll be careful. Don't do too much portamento. Don't play Broken Melody by Van Veen at all. So everything depends on what you want. But the question is difficult. Okay, sorry.
And Fernando, you want to answer?
Yes, I totally agree with what Aldo said, and also what Octavie said. It's very important, and of course it's something that is a question of taste, and like Aldo said, the question is what you want. So Jacopo, I can answer for me and Edoardo. Like I said before, for us the most important is the structure of the piece. So we can imagine to see the piece as a picture, for example. In a picture, you can see that there is maybe somebody that is close up to you, and something, maybe mountains or I don't know what, that is in the background, so that it's less important in a way. And to put all this in the right, how to say, in the right place, it is necessary to follow rules of the interpretation. So for me, the bad taste is when you change the order of the characters in the picture. And for me, it's not nice to see a very confused picture. So this is bad taste for me, and this is what we try not to do. And we try to do everything as clear as possible.
So maybe Mark can...
This is a question primarily for our cellists, and especially Aldo, since you played a solo work, although Artem, if you want to weigh in as well, feel free. We hear plenty of examples, of course, on early recordings of string players not using equal temperament. So I was wondering, to what extent, as you were making these recordings, was intonation and temperament on your mind?
Who wants to answer?
Especially with regard to equal temperament or unequal temperament.
I would say, since I played the Popper solo, that in general, what I try, well, of course, I didn't do a study as interesting as Johannes. I don't know if I remember Johannes Gebauer. He did a study about the intonation in Joachim's performance in recordings. And I have to confess that I haven't gone through that. Of course, I play a lot of HIP groups, and I certainly don't like expressive intonation. That wouldn't be absolutely one of my choices at all. But since I had to play also with Enesco, which the piano roll was quite equal temperament, I think that influenced me for the whole video a little bit, in a way, I guess. When I was solo, of course, I had more freedom, but I sort of followed that. That's why I tuned 440, and I had no choice.
What about you, Fernando?
Sorry, the question was about the temperament and intonation.
Yeah. To what extent were you thinking about that in terms of equal temperament or not equal temperament, etc.?
I think that basically the equal temperament is the most important, because especially when we play as a duo, it's very important to be very close with the intonation of the piano. Of course, this has an influence also when you play solo, because it remains in the ears. And so the equal temperament, it's always present. I would say for me, it's always present. But of course, during experiments, I tried others kind of intonation, like expressive, for example, natural intonation. We tried also with the piano to experiment. But the risk, it's always to go a little bit out of the borders, and this can be a little bit strange for today's audience, I think. So personally, I always try to be very careful, not to be too far from the intonation people today is used to listen.
And what about Octavie?
Yeah, it's a difficult one, I find, because I think you really can change your relationship with intonation as you play different types of music and as you shift from one instrumentation to another. Like if you play a lot with harpsichord and in different temperaments, and then you come to, I do feel like I've changed in the past years as I did more early music, and so I'm not so keen on equal temperament anymore. So when I come again with modern piano or close to modern, you know, early 20th century piano, and it's tuned in equal temperament, I think there's still some of this early music attitude with intonation that remains. But I do have to check certain notes that are really in the chord and would appear really strange if I don't tune them with the piano. So I'm thinking of the F sharp in the beginning of the Romance, for example. If I were to do it too low as I would have liked, then it really was, actually I had this problem. I would tune it as I would usually with my D string quite low, and then start the piece and oops, well, so that had to be adjusted, I think. But there's definitely more to be done, I think, in my own development. And I would love to read the article that Johannes knows about, or did you write an article about this, Johannes, or?
Yeah. No. What I did a paper in Vienna at the conference that Clive and Neil Perez da Costa were doing about a year. And what I did there, I tried to approach this from different angles and try to analyze recordings and get that together with the information we have from texts, especially in the Joachim tradition. And I can say two things, perhaps. Firstly, the intonation that they were still pursuing was certainly closer to what we do in the early music movement. So we try to have pure thirds and not so much leading notes tending upwards and things like that. That's the one thing. And the other thing is that they were aware of playing together with a piano. And they were aware that certainly if you were playing the same notes as the piano, then you had to adjust to the piano. But at the same time, there was a strong belief that you could do your own intonation even when you were playing with the piano, and it wouldn't actually be a problem. And you can trace that in the recordings as well. It's a complex subject, and it would be worth writing an essay about it. There are some essays about it, but I think they don't get the full picture yet. So it would be good to perhaps pursue that further. But as I say, it's a very complex subject, and it can't be answered within sort of 5 minutes.
There is also this book that addresses some of these problems. I don't know if you can see it. But
it's quite a polemic book, and unfortunately gets a lot of things wrong, I'm afraid. Not only wrong, but also his measurements are so way off that I don't believe a word of what he's writing, unfortunately. There's a better article by a German musicologist, Sinowczyk, who analyzed recordings and also dealt with other people's analysis of recordings, of early recordings and newer recordings, and especially tried to understand the difference between Joachim's recordings and Sarasate's recordings, on the other hand, because there's quite a lot of material, textual material, which one can talk about. But again, it's a complex subject, and I think that book which you just showed makes it far too easy.
Thank you very much. There is a question from Pablo Martos Lazano. Yes, please.
Hello, everyone. So first of all, I want to really congratulate you for the beautiful work you are doing. The recordings are really amazing. Quality of sound, your performance is personal and historical at the same time. So really congratulations. This is something that I appreciate a lot. It's not only a good job that you were reading the books and the methods, but you put a big part of yourself, which is for me very, very nice. My question is about the vibrato, because it's a subject, me like violinist, that I find myself a bit lost, because I was actually searching different sources and I didn't find quite a lot. In my case, especially, I was interested in the vibrato for Niccolo Paganini, which is also an style very peculiar because it's bel canto music, but virtuoso, so it's very linked with the job you are doing, but this is a bit special on the other hand. So I would like to ask you if you can recommend me some sources to read about that, and which are the sources you were reading to build your own sound with the vibrato that is part of your sound. I know it's very complicated because it's very linked to the way of phrasing, the way of singing. It's a big deal. So if you can tell me your thoughts about that, I will appreciate a lot. Thank you.
Who starts?
Well, maybe I can start with the answer. Thank you so much for being here, Pablo. It's so nice to see you. And well, I would say that, for instance, the approach that in my case I did to vibrato when I was playing the Abendlied and when I was playing the rest of the pieces was very different. In the Abendlied, I was more restrained. I was trying to do something very different. But I think your question, you are very lucky because here we have the person who knows the most. To start with, I think vibrato is a confusing term, and I would like our dear Mr. Clive Brown if he could orient you a little bit. I think here we cannot say anything, but just let him talk.
Yeah.
If you don't mind, Clive.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Well, it's so complicated. I'm not sure I can say much that's useful at this stage, but I've recently been doing a lot more research on it. And it is a very, very complex issue. People use the word vibrato and they have in their ears what we call vibrato. But the kinds of things that people were doing in the past probably sounded extremely different from that. I prefer to call them trembling effects rather than vibrato, because some of them were very weird indeed. I don't know how many of you know the treatise by Luis Alonso from the 1890s called Le Virtuose Moderne. And he starts his section on vibrato by saying it's a major thing for a virtuoso. And then he says there are 5 kinds of vibrato. The first one, he says, is where you put a finger on the string and then wave another finger in the air like a false trill. And he says this primitive vibrato is no longer used. He's writing in 1895. Only Italian players still do it, he says. Then he goes on to say vibrato of the wrist. He describes it as really disgusting. It sounds like a street singer and you're glad when the player stops. Then he talks about vibrato of the forearm and he says this is even worse and everything sounds out of tune and you really shouldn't do it. Then he talks about a vibrato which is made by putting the finger on the string and then touching another string to create sympathetic vibrations. And he says this is beautiful, this is pearl-like. He's not the only person to talk about this in the late 19th century. Schroeder, for instance, Carl Schroeder talks about it. And then finally he says there's the vibrato of the bow, a kind of serpentine movement. It hardly is heard, but it looks elegant, he says. And that's 1895. So the whole world of vibrato in the 19th century was something utterly different from anything we know about. If you go back further, it's quite clear that in the early 19th century, it was in very bad repute. People were all the time warning not to do it. It was a very bad old habit, they say. And Bayeux, for instance, talks about if your vibrato is too slow, it will sound old-fashioned, because that's what people were doing in the 18th century. Some rather slow movement, goodness knows how it sounded, on the violin, of course. And then, of course, singers were doing similar things. And, well, it's so complicated. I could probably go on for an hour talking about it, but I shouldn't. But, you know, the words themselves are problematic. Vibrato in the 19th century didn't mean a trembling of pitch. Where it's used at all, it means a trembling of intensity. So singers would do this more or less on exactly the same pitch, but trembling of intensity. And then they called tremolo when it was a trembling of pitch. And these two things were quite distinct. So yeah, it's immensely complicated. I've just been writing something about it, which will be published fairly soon, but you know, it could go on, you could write a whole book on it, because actually one of the amazing things now is the accessibility of journal records, because you can word search everything. You can search the whole of the English language periodicals on British periodicals. You can search almost all of the German language and French, many French ones, on the ANNO's website, which is the Austrian National Library. And it's amazing. You put in a search word and you find incredible things that you've never come across before. Changed the whole nature of research. So anybody who's interested, you can use those websites and you'll find fascinating stuff, which will completely change your view of what we're talking about, really. So that's probably all I should say now.
Yes, can you give us the link to this website again?
Yeah, I'll send you something and then you can circulate.
Okay, okay, thank you.
I share my article with anybody who wants to see it. It's only a draft at the moment, but if anybody lets me know, I'll send them a copy.
Great.
Maybe I could step in here as well, because we are talking about early recordings. And here we have evidence that's very specific. So there is a way of analyzing the vibrato that you can hear on these recordings by transferring the sound file to a sonic visualization program. So you can really see and measure the frequency and the amplitudes of the vibrato. And of course, the question whether there's continuous use of vibrato in a specific recording or not. So if you want to understand somebody's choice of vibrato in an existing recording, we can be very precise. So that's a very good tool. But of course, I completely agree with Clive. There is so much confusion about vibrato as an expression, or vibrato as a means of sound production, continuous vibrato or whatever. And it has been changing over times and styles, that we really would need a book, a good comprehensive book on these questions, and there's nothing around yet. So I'm also very much looking forward to reading your new article, Clive.
Okay. Well, it's only scratching the surface.
I can imagine.
Somebody wants to ask another question? It's already 2 hours we are together. I don't know.
Christopher mentioned in the chat, Christopher Woodward.
Oh, yes, yes,
if
right.
he wants to ask it.
Yeah. Yes.
Could you repeat it for us?
Christopher?
Is he still around?
Yeah, I was just asking. It seems to me, sorry, it seems to me that most of you have extensive experience in Baroque historically informed performance as well, and you know, the more that I'm studying both Baroque and Romantic era performance practice, the more it seems to me that there are certain things in common, like an emphasis on rhetoric and oratorical aspects and an improvisational spirit that are both kind of common to Baroque and Romantic performance practice. So I'm curious if you have any thoughts as to anything else, any expressive devices or things that seem to you to be common to both performance practice styles.
Who wants to answer?
I think it's a difficult and interesting question. You don't want to say anything about this?
Well, I don't know if I'm the best person to answer this question. I think Clive again would be a much better one. But I do think that there's a lot more continuity between Baroque and Romantic than perhaps we tend to think, and definitely a lot more than between the Romantic era and the 20th century, the sort of between the two world wars period. But of course, we don't know, apart from maybe taking into account barrel organs and things like that, which is very little information. Some still, yeah. Yeah, there are indeed similarities between barrel organs and early recordings. But when it comes to comparing written text to, and you know, reading a text and then imagining how it sounds, that I think is almost an impossible task. I think from the recorded period, we know how often written text and then the recorded material, how often they, to our modern ears, contradict each other. And the way they understood things that they wrote and heard was, yeah, it was a different mindset. That's very difficult to get into, but we try to do what we can.
So that's, if you look into earlier periods, you only mostly have written sources to base yourself on, and whether what you read is exactly similar to a feature that we think is similar that we hear on early recordings, whether they were actually playing that way or not is, well, we'll never know. So.
Maybe it's something very scandalous, I don't know, but I personally think that we can learn from early recordings more about earlier periods than from, well, definitely than from listening to the previous generations of hip performers. But that's, well, it made Clive laugh, so I guess that's scandalous enough.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that, for example, we know from 19th century treatises that they talk very much when they deal with bel canto, that they talk about a tradition that came from the 18th century, for example, with different Italian schools of bel canto. And if it was a tradition that was coming from the 18th century, I don't see the reason why, even if it was a bit different in some things, but at least it's not like in the 20th century where we can see that there was a tradition that was clearly disrupted. And yeah.
Yeah. Of course, there is still such a huge range of even on the early recordings, we can already hear that, and all of, you know, the majority of stuff was not recorded, so we can only imagine how much there was
variety.
Yeah.
Yes, maybe I would like to just step in. I think because we're talking about early recordings and how these could inform our own choices as performers of this repertoire. I think it's really important to parallel what you hear in these recordings with what you get from the treatises, and to rethink, just as you all said, to rethink how people write about things and what they take for granted and what's not written. I call those the hidden subtexts. And of course, if you take that into account, then of course, the 19th century, late 19th century recordings are a case study in how people who leave recordings talk about what they are doing. This is why in our earlier research projects, we have been focusing on jargon words and terminology of how musicians talk about what they are doing in order to get into people's minds and to open up how much they control what they are doing on these records and how much intentional decision-making is involved, and how many unintentional things are in the background that we still need to acknowledge, because the unintentional parts would not be talked and written about in treatises, because obviously they take that for granted if they write to their contemporaries. So this is a methodic approach that we took in several research projects. And there's also another very interesting perspective on this, which is the longue durée. That's constants in the tradition of performance that do not change despite the change of styles. And just as Laura said before, there's a very big deliberate break in the 19th century when after the First World War, people needed to deliberately break away from what was considered the bad 19th century. And I think this is for the first time a moment where people not only changed the style of composition, but also the style of performance. And I think it was much more stable in earlier periods. There are many hints, but this is of course a subject for future research, to look for longue durée and look for jargon words and subtexts.
Maybe this is for a next meeting. Maybe we should raise new ideas to join all of us. You know, we have other subjects on the way, Brahms and Beethoven. Yeah. I don't know if you have any other question. Maybe we are at the end of this meeting. I don't know, unless somebody wants to speak. There is Jacopo, you want to speak?
Yeah, just one more thing about also this bel canto topic that was coming up. Just listened recently the very first recording of the Opera Rigoletto, the entire opera, and this from the Opéra Italien in Paris in 1912. And comparing with the first recording that we have in Italy, that I think is that with Fernando de Lucia, some years later, but I'm not completely sure. Although the singers from Paris, the French singers, they were partly trained in Italy, the performance is very, very, very different. Very different. So I think, anyway, in different countries, although the was more or less the same periods, the approach of the music was very, very different. So I found this thing very interesting. So it was just something to share according to what was said by Laura, and so just these thoughts. I don't know if you know about those recordings, but it was interesting to me to discover that. So just that.
About this, I would like to say that for me the problem is not only in the way to perform that change between 19th century and 20th century, and in the difference between countries and also performance that are very different, but also in the way to practice, because we also have to remember that till the end of the 19th century, the way the people was training in the music schools, in the conservatories, it was very different from now. And they learn in more or less the same way now jazz people is learning music. So they learn improvising and copying the teachers, writing music, and they were a little bit, for me, more close in their own style. So I think this is one of the reasons we see all this big difference in the way to perform. And that's why when I spoke about the bel canto, I spoke about general things. But of course, if we go in the details, like with the vibrato, like all these topics, then it's very complicated, all the material we have.
I just wanted to add to the analogy with the jazz performers that in our postmodernist world, jazz players are now imitating recordings as one of the main ways of studying. And not necessarily their teachers.
Yeah.
Maybe because they have recordings now.
Yes.
Yeah. We didn't invent anything here.
Yes, in the past, it was not like that.
No, that's for sure.
Okay, any other question or any other thoughts?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask Artem something a bit more specific, because yeah, since the introductions to the videos were a bit short, I was wondering about when you were trying to implement into your playing some characteristics of the agogics of Saint-Saëns playing related to the waltz as a genre. Did you get some, because I know that you studied other waltzes, did you get some new conclusions in these weeks about this topic? Because as we are now dealing with, yeah, with waltzes preparing for this Brahms video. Of course, the French waltzes are very different, but I think it's very fascinating how these dances can give so much space for a lot of different agogics and playing around with rhythm. So thank you.
Yes, I have to say that I didn't really go into specifically the genre of waltz, but at the same time, I can't say that I hear the difference in Saint-Saëns' approach to waltz as something specific. It's definitely nothing like a Viennese waltz or even that recording of Liebling, I think, of Chopin that we heard. It was a mazurka that sounded very much like a waltz. So in terms of agogics, I think it was, yeah, something more general, that certain ways he does things in pretty much all of his playing, regardless of what genre it is. So specifically about waltz, I don't have anything new there.
Thank you. It was anyway great. I really enjoyed all of the videos. It was really amazing to learn from you.
Thanks.
So, any last questions? And I think we will try to do it for the other videos, this kind of meetings. We have to speak all together, but it was a very nice experience, I think. I don't know what you thought, but we must keep on.
Thank you, Sylvie, for allowing us to have this experiment. This was a first for me in this particular format.
Yeah, it was complicated at first, but I think we invest a lot at trying to understand how it works, but we should take advantage of this to do other things later. Yeah.
I can say that it doesn't work on a train. But I'm not going to try that again. It was dreadful. But I managed to hear Aldo, and I thought he was actually wonderful. And the Popper studies, I thought for years when I was a student, this ought to be possible to play in a concert, but I never had the nerve. And I certainly wouldn't do it now. But that was great, and I'll catch up with the other things. I'm sorry I missed so much of it, but yeah, it was wonderful.
Thank you so much. That's great to hear from you.
Yeah.
Oh, yes, of course. No, I loved it, really. Yeah.
It's so sweet. Thanks.
So maybe we wish you a happy summer for all of you. I don't know, and we say good luck to Laura and her recording, which is next week, and hope to see you back in September. And have a nice summer. Yeah.
A bientôt.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you, everybody. Ciao.
Bye. Ciao.